Welcome to my channel, a list that brings your story about the love of a mafia boss. Now let's listen.
The courthouse steps were slick with October rain when I first saw him again. 10 years had passed since Severo Constantine had burned my world to ash, yet I recognized him instantly, the broad shoulders now filling a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my father's entire wardrobe once had. The dark hair swept back from a face that time had sharpened rather than softened. The storm-gray eyes that had looked at my father with such cold satisfaction the night our empire fell. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The last time Severo Constantine had seen Hortensia Belmont, I'd been 18, hiding behind my mother's skirts at my father's funeral, my brother Marco's protective arm around my shoulders. That girl had been soft, terrified, broken by grief. The woman standing before him now wore a tailored navy dress that whispered wealth without shouting it, my chestnut hair styled in a simple chignon that drew attention to cheekbones I'd inherited from my mother's side. The Russian side he wouldn't know about. Miss Belmont. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Deep, controlled, with that faint Italian accent that softened certain consonants. He extended his hand, and I noted the Patek Philippe watch at his wrist, the platinum cufflinks monogrammed with his initials. Every detail calculated to project power. I took his hand, my grip firm despite the flutter in my stomach. His palm was warm, calloused in a way that surprised me. Men like Severo Constantine didn't typically do their own dirty work. Mr. Constantine, I kept my voice steady, professional. Thank you for agreeing to meet. His eyes studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Not recognition, but assessment. Calculating my worth, my threat level, my potential uses. I'd learned to read men like him during my decade in exile, the way they looked at women as either prizes or problems, never as equals. Your lawyer was quite persistent, he said, releasing my hand. Though I confess I'm curious why the last surviving Belmont wishes to speak with me after all these years. Last surviving. The words landed like stones in still water. My brother Marco, killed in the crossfire when Severo's men had raided our family's shipping warehouse. My father, dead of a heart attack 3 days later. Though we both knew it was the destruction of everything he'd built that had truly killed him. My mother, who'd retreated to a convent in Sicily and refused all contact with the world that had taken her husband and son. I have a proposition, I said, gesturing toward the coffee shop across the street. Neutral ground, public enough to be safe, quiet enough for the conversation we needed to have. One I believe will interest you. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. A Belmont with a business proposition for a Constantine. The world has certainly changed. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I turned and walked toward the coffee shop, trusting he would follow. Men like Severo couldn't resist a mystery, especially one wrapped in the form of a woman they believed they'd already defeated. The coffee shop was nearly empty at this hour. Mid-afternoon, after the lunch rush, but before the evening crowd. I chose a corner table with a clear view of both exits. Old habits from a childhood spent learning to always know the way out. Severo ordered an espresso, black, no sugar. I ordered tea, aware of his slight frown at my choice. Good. Let him underestimate me. Let him think I was too delicate for the bitter realities of his world. You've done well for yourself, I observed once we were seated. I hear your operations have expanded considerably. Shipping, real estate, several legitimate businesses that provide excellent cover for the less legitimate ones. His expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders. Careful, Miss Belmont. Accusations of illegality could be considered slander. I'm not accusing, I replied calmly. I'm acknowledging reality. My family was in the same business after all. Or have you forgotten? I forget nothing. The words were soft, dangerous. Your father tried to kill me. He failed. I responded appropriately. As if destroying 3 generations of my family's work, scattering our allies, seizing our assets, and leaving us with nothing but debts and shame was a proportionate response to a failed assassination attempt that my father had ordered in desperation, knowing Severo was coming for us anyway. I'm not here to debate the past, I said, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream at him, to make him understand what he'd taken from me. But that wasn't the plan. The plan required patience, control, the very qualities my father had lacked. Then why are you here? I met his gaze directly. I'm here to propose a marriage. The espresso cup paused halfway to his lips. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw genuine surprise cross his features. Then it was gone, replaced by that calculating coldness. A marriage, he repeated, his tone suggesting I'd proposed something obscene. Between you and me. I kept my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. A business arrangement, nothing more. You gain legitimacy. The Belmont name still carries weight in certain European circles, despite everything. I gain protection and the resources to rebuild what was lost. Why would I need legitimacy? His voice was sharp. And why would you want anything to do with the man who destroyed your family? I'd prepared for these questions, spent weeks crafting answers that would satisfy his ego while hiding my true intentions. Because you're expanding into legitimate markets. Real estate development, international shipping contracts with governments. Those circles still value old names, old blood. As for why I would agree, I paused, letting vulnerability show in my expression. Calculated, controlled vulnerability. Because I have nothing left. My mother has abandoned the world. I have no siblings, no allies. You've already taken everything from the Belmonts except the name itself. I'm simply offering to sell you that last piece on my terms. Severo leaned back in his chair, studying me with those storm-gray eyes. I could see him turning it over in his mind, examining it from every angle for traps and hidden dangers. What are your terms? A prenuptial agreement that protects what little I have left. Separate residences. You have your life, I have mine. Public appearances together as needed to maintain the illusion. And I hesitated, as if this next part embarrassed me. A stipend. Enough to live comfortably, to maintain appearances. I won't be paraded as your trophy while dressed in rags. You want to be kept, he said, and I heard the contempt in his voice. Good. Let him think me mercenary and shallow. Let him believe he understood my motivations. I want to survive, I corrected. You won the war, Mr. Constantine. This is simply me acknowledging that defeat and negotiating the best terms of surrender I can manage. He was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table, a tell I filed away for later use. Severo Constantine drummed his fingers when he was considering something that appealed to him, but that he didn't fully trust. I'll have my lawyer draw up papers, he said finally. You'll submit to a full background check. Any hint of deception, any suggestion that this is some elaborate revenge scheme, and the deal is off. Of course. I'd anticipated this. Spent 2 years creating a paper trail that would satisfy even the most thorough investigation. A modest apartment in Queens, a job as a translator at a European import firm, student loans from a graduate degree in international business, the life of a woman trying desperately to claw her way back to respectability through legitimate means. He would find nothing, because there was nothing to find in the places he would look. One more thing, Severo said, leaning forward. If we do this, you will be mine in every way that matters. My wife, my responsibility, which means you follow my rules, you defer to my judgment, and you never, never embarrass me publicly. Understood? I lowered my eyes, the picture of feminine submission. Understood. Good. He stood, dropping cash on the table to cover both our drinks. Adrian will contact you within the week. Don't make me regret this, Miss Belmont. As he walked away, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Regret would come, but not in the way he imagined. I had spent 10 years preparing for this moment. 10 years learning everything about Severo Constantine, his businesses, his allies, his weaknesses. 10 years transforming myself from a grief-stricken girl into a woman capable of matching him, move for move. He thought he was acquiring the last trophy from a conquered enemy. What he was actually doing was inviting a ghost into his home. And ghosts, as my mother used to say, existed for only one purpose: to haunt. I finished my tea slowly, watching through the window as his black Mercedes pulled away from the curb. Let the game begin. The background check took 3 weeks. I spent that time exactly as I had spent the previous 2 years, going to work, coming home to my modest apartment, maintaining the careful facade of normalcy. But now, I allowed small cracks to show. A worried glance over my shoulder when I thought no one was watching. A visible flinch when a car backfired on the street. The behavior of a woman who knew she was being observed and wanted her watchers to see exactly what they expected. Fear. Severo's people were good, but I'd learned from the best. My father had taught me to spot surveillance before I could read chapter books. The man in the coffee shop who appeared at the same time every morning, always with a newspaper he never seemed to finish. The jogger who ran past my building at precisely 6:15 each evening. The delivery driver who lingered too long before getting back in his truck. I documented nothing, confronted no one. I simply lived my carefully constructed life and let them find exactly what I wanted them to find. Adrian Delacroix called on a Tuesday. Severo's lawyer had a voice like expensive scotch, smooth, refined, with an underlying burn. Miss Belmont, the background check has been completed to Mr. Constantine's satisfaction. He'd like to proceed with the arrangement. I see. I kept my voice neutral, though triumph surged through me. First barrier cleared. What are the next steps? A meeting to discuss the prenuptial agreement. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at my office. He gave me an address in Midtown, the kind of building where the lobby marble probably cost more than most people's cars. Please bring any documentation regarding assets you wish to protect. I almost laughed. The Belmont assets that mattered weren't documented anywhere Severo could find them. Offshore accounts in 3 different names, property in countries with favorable privacy laws, investments hidden behind layers of shell corporations. My father might have been reckless in many ways, but he'd been meticulous about hiding money. Of course, I'll be there. Adrian's office was exactly what I expected. Walls of law books no one ever read, leather furniture, a view of Central Park that probably added 6 figures to his annual rent. He rose when his assistant showed me in, extending a hand with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Belmont, thank you for coming. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Can I offer you anything? Water? Coffee? No, thank you. I settled into the chair, crossing my ankles in the way my mother had taught me. The posture of old money, even when you were wearing last season's dress from a consignment shop. Adrian slid a thick document across the desk. The prenuptial agreement. I'll summarize the key points, but I recommend you have your own attorney review it before signing. I already had. Or rather, Anastasia Romanov had, my mother's cousin's daughter, the only family member who'd stayed in contact after everything fell apart. She worked as a paralegal in Boston, far enough from New York that Severo's people wouldn't make the connection. She'd reviewed the document I'd received via encrypted email the night before. Please, I said, opening the folder. Adrian's summary was professional, thorough. The agreement protected Severo's considerable assets while providing me with a monthly allowance of $20,000. generous enough to maintain the lifestyle expected of his wife, modest enough to make clear my subordinate position, separate residences until such time as Severo determined otherwise, no claim to his business interests, standard infidelity clauses that applied to me but not to him. The imbalance is quite notable, I observed mildly. Adrian's smile was apologetic, but unyielding. Mr. Constantine is entering this arrangement from a position of considerable strength, Miss Belmont. The terms reflect that reality. I understand. I pulled a pen from my purse, a Mont Blanc my father had given my mother for their anniversary, one of the few pieces I'd managed to keep. I have one addition to request. Adrian's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh? A clause guaranteeing my safety, physical safety. I met his gaze directly. I'm aware of Mr. Constantine's reputation. I'm also aware that women in his world sometimes disappear when they become inconvenient. I want legal protection establishing that if anything happens to me, certain documents will be released to federal authorities. It was a bluff. I had no such documents, not yet. But it was a bluff that served multiple purposes. It made me appear savvy enough to protect myself, frightened enough to need protection. And most importantly, it suggested I knew things worth protecting. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Respect, perhaps. I'll discuss it with Mr. Constantine. Though I should warn you, he doesn't respond well to threats. It's not a threat, I said calmly. It's insurance. Surely a man in his position understands the value of that. Adrian made a note on his legal pad. Anything else? Just one question. When is the wedding? 2 months from now, December 15th. He consulted his notes. Mr. Constantine believes a winter wedding will provide appropriate optics, St. Patrick's Cathedral, if that's acceptable. Small ceremony, limited guest list. He'll provide a list of approved vendors for your dress and other necessities. Of course he would. Control every detail, even what I wore to my own wedding. I added it to the growing mental file I was building, Severo Constantine's patterns, his tells, his obsessive need to orchestrate everything around him. That's acceptable, I said. Though nothing about this was truly acceptable. It was simply necessary. I signed the prenuptial agreement that afternoon, after calling Anastasia to confirm she'd reviewed my requested addition. Severo agreed to the safety clause with barely a hesitation. Adrian reported back that he'd actually seemed amused by it. He said to tell you that he appreciates a woman who understands the value of self-preservation, Adrian relayed over the phone. The wedding preparations will begin immediately. You'll be contacted by his event coordinator tomorrow. The event coordinator turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman named Isabella Marchetti, who spoke with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd orchestrated dozens of society weddings and viewed them all as military operations requiring precise execution. She arrived at my apartment with fabric swatches, vendor catalogs, and an expression that barely concealed her disdain for my modest surroundings. Mr. Constantine has specific expectations, she said, spreading samples across my second-hand coffee table. The dress should be elegant, but not ostentatious. Classic, traditional. He selected Vera Wang as the designer. I'll arrange your first fitting for next week. I nodded along, playing the compliant bride, while cataloging every detail she revealed about Severo's preferences. He liked traditional, good to know. He valued elegance over flash, useful. He was hands-on even in matters like wedding planning. Important. And the guest list? I asked. Isabella consulted her tablet. Approximately 150 people. Mr. Constantine's business associates primarily. He's asked if you have family or friends you'd like to invite. The question landed like a blade. Family, friends. The normal things a bride should have. My mother is in poor health and won't be able to attend, I said, which was true enough. I have a cousin, Anastasia Romanoff, in Boston. I'd like her there. Isabella made a note. Anyone else? No, No one else. Something that might have been pity flickered across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. Very well. I'll send you the venue details and a preliminary schedule. The next 6 weeks will be quite busy with fittings and planning. Mr. Constantine wants everything perfect. After she left, I stood at my apartment window, looking out over Queens. In 6 weeks, I would be Mrs. Severo Constantine, the wife of the man who'd destroyed my family, living in his home, eating at his table, playing the part of the defeated enemy who'd accepted her fate. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The first fitting is Thursday at 2. Don't be late. S. Severo himself, not delegating this communication to Isabella or Adrian. Interesting. Either he didn't trust them to emphasize his control, or he wanted me to know he was personally invested in this performance. I replied simply, I'll be there. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of careful choreography. Dress fittings where I stood silent while strangers pinned and tucked expensive fabric to my body. Meetings with florists and caterers where Isabella made all the decisions while I nodded agreement. Publicity photos where Severo and I posed together for society pages, his hand possessive on my waist, my smile demure and appropriate. Through it all, I studied him. The way he took his coffee black but preferred bourbon to wine. The slight tension in his jaw when someone mentioned shipments from Eastern Europe. A weak point in his supply chain, perhaps. The way his eyes tracked every exit in every room we entered together. The careful distance he maintained between us in private, as if afraid that touching me might somehow contaminate him with Belmont weakness. He was testing me too, I realized. Sending me to events alone to see if I would embarrass him. Introducing me to his associates and watching to see if I would reveal anything about our arrangement. Having people engage me in conversation about my family, about the past, about my father. I passed every test. I was gracious to his associates, appropriately vague about my family's fall, perfectly content with my subordinate role. The ideal trophy wife, beautiful enough to enhance his image, submissive enough not to challenge his authority, broken enough that no one suspected she might still have teeth. 2 weeks before the wedding, Severo finally invited me to dinner. Not at a restaurant, but at his penthouse, the first time I would enter the space that would soon become my cage. I want you to see your new home, he'd said when he called. Not asked, stated. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'll send a car. The car that arrived was a black Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver who never spoke. It took me across the bridge into Manhattan, through streets that grew progressively wealthier, until we pulled up to a building on the Upper East Side that practically radiated money. The doorman knew who I was without asking. Good evening, Miss Belmont. Mr. Constantine is expecting you. The elevator required a key card to access the penthouse. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that could only be described as a fortress disguised as luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Marble floors that gleamed like still water. Furniture that was beautiful and uncomfortable in equal measure. Designed to impress, not to welcome. Severo stood by the windows, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his shirt open at the collar in a rare concession to relaxation. He turned when he heard the elevator, and for a moment, something unguarded crossed his face. Then it was gone. Welcome home, Hortensia. Hearing my full name in his voice felt like a violation. Everyone called me Orty, had called me that since childhood. My father, my brother, even my mother in her rare moments of softness. But Severo used my full name, rolling the syllables with that Italian accent that made it sound like a possession he was claiming. It's beautiful, I said, because it was expected. Because a woman in my position would be awed by this display of wealth. He gestured toward the dining room, visible through an archway. Dinner is ready. I hope you like ossobuco. My chef is from Milan. Of course he had a chef from Milan. Severo Constantine didn't do anything halfway. I followed him to a dining table that could seat 12, but was set intimately for 2, candles flickering between us like tiny warnings. Wine? He held up a bottle. Something Italian, probably worth more than my monthly rent. Just water, please. I needed my mind clear for this. Needed to navigate whatever game he was playing by inviting me here 2 weeks before we were legally bound. He poured water into crystal that caught the candlelight and shattered it into rainbows. Then he sat across from me, studying my face with that intensity that made me feel like a specimen under glass. "Tell me about your mother," he said abruptly. The question caught me off guard. "What about her?" "You said she's in poor health. Where is she? What happened to her after?" He paused delicately. "After everything." "After you destroyed us," I finished silently. "She's in a convent in Sicily. She had a breakdown after my father died. The sisters there care for her." "You visit her?" "No." The word came out harder than I intended. "She doesn't want visitors. She's chosen to separate herself from the world that took her husband and son." Something flickered in Severo's eyes. Not quite guilt, but perhaps recognition of damage done. "And you? How did you survive these 10 years? I took a small bite of the osso buco, buying myself time. This felt like more than dinner conversation. This felt like an interrogation disguised as intimacy. "I worked," I said simply. "Finished my education. Found a job that paid enough to live on. Learned to be invisible." I met his gaze. "The world isn't kind to the children of fallen empires." I learned quickly that anonymity was safer than revenge. Revenge. He tasted the word like wine. "Did you consider it? Coming after me?" "I considered it," I admitted, because denying it would seem false. I was 18 and angry, but I wasn't stupid. What could I do against a man like you? I had no resources, no allies, no skills beyond the useless accomplishments my mother had taught me. So I chose survival instead. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And now? Marrying me? Is this survival too? What else would it be? Some women might see it as an opportunity for delayed revenge. Get close to the enemy. Wait for the right moment to strike." I allowed myself a bitter laugh. "Strike how? I have nothing, Severo. No weapons, no power, no leverage. You've won. This marriage is simply me acknowledging that reality and trying to salvage what little I can from the wreckage." The use of his first name was calculated, a small intimacy, a sign of acceptance. I watched him register it, saw the slight relaxation in his shoulders. "You're smarter than I expected," he said, refilling his bourbon. "Most people in your position would come in making demands, trying to negotiate from weakness as if it were strength. But you understand the game." "My father didn't teach me much," I said quietly. "But he did teach me that. Know your position. Play the hand you're dealt, not the one you wish you had. Your father was a fool." The words hung between us, sharp as broken glass. I forced myself to remain calm, to not react to the insult even as fury burned in my chest. "Perhaps," I said carefully, "but he was my father. Whatever his faults, he loved me." Severo's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "And that's why you're really here, isn't it? Not just survival. You want to preserve something of his legacy, the Belmont name, if nothing else. He wasn't wrong, just not in the way he thought." "Yes," I admitted. "Is that so terrible? To want to honor my family's memory, even if I do it by binding myself to the man who destroyed them? Some might call it a betrayal. Some might call it practical." I set down my fork, no longer pretending to eat. "You asked why I agreed to this. The truth is simple. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of wondering when the last remnants of my father's debts will catch up to me. You're offering protection, stability, a life where I don't have to count every dollar. In exchange, you get a wife who understands your world and won't ask uncomfortable questions. It seems like a fair trade. Something dangerous glinted in his eyes. And if I want more than that? My heart stuttered, but I kept my voice steady. More than what? More than a convenient arrangement. He stood, moving around the table with predatory grace. You're a beautiful woman, Hortensia. Smart, composed, from good bloodlines despite the current circumstances. What if I decided I wanted a real wife, not just a trophy? He was close now, too close. I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and smoke. Could see the faint scar along his jawline that his 5 o'clock shadow almost hid. Then I would fulfill that role to the best of my ability, I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. I'm not naive, Severo. I know what marriage to a man like you entails. Do you? His hand came up, fingers catching my chin, tilting my face toward his. Because I don't think you have any idea what you've agreed to. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me. Could see the consideration in his eyes, the weighing of whether claiming this particular prize ahead of schedule would serve his purposes. Instead, he released me and stepped back, leaving me breathless and angry at my body's traitorous response to his proximity. The prenuptial agreement includes a fidelity clause for you, he said, his tone businesslike again. But not for me. Do you understand what that means? It means you can fuck whoever you want while I'm expected to remain faithful. The crude words were deliberate, a small rebellion against his control. Yes, I understand. His eyebrows rose slightly. You have a mouth on you when you're angry. You just threaten to force yourself on me. I think a little profanity is warranted. I didn't threaten anything. His voice went cold. I don't need to force women, Hortensia. They come willingly. But you should understand what you're entering into. I won't parade mistresses in front of you. I'm not cruel for sport. But I also won't pretend to be something I'm not. This marriage is a business arrangement. My personal life remains my own. Understood. I stood, needing to end this dinner before I said something that would ruin everything. Thank you for the meal, and for clarifying expectations. I should go. Sit down. It wasn't a request. I remained standing, meeting his gaze with defiance I probably shouldn't show. I'd prefer to leave, and I'd prefer you stay. He moved to the window, looking out over the glittering city. There's something else we need to discuss. I waited, still standing, still poised for flight, even though I knew the elevator required his keycard to operate. Your father, Severo said without turning around. The night he tried to have me killed. Did you know about it beforehand? The question caught me completely off guard. In 10 years, no one had ever asked me that. No, I was 18. He kept me away from all of it. The business, the violence, all of it. But you knew what he was. What kind of man your father was. I knew he wasn't a saint. I chose my words carefully. I knew our wealth came from things that couldn't be discussed in polite company. But the details? No. He protected me from those. Severo turned then, and something in his expression made my breath catch. He loved you. I could see it, that day at the funeral. The way you cried for him, even knowing what he was. That kind of love is rare in our world. Our world. As if I were already part of it again. As if the decade I'd spent in exile had been merely a pause. Did your father love you? I asked, surprising myself with the boldness. His face closed off immediately. That's not relevant. Isn't it? You're about to become my husband. Shouldn't I know something about the man I'm binding myself to beyond his business reputation? For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my father taught me that love is a weakness. That sentiment gets you killed. He loved my mother, and when she died, it nearly destroyed him. He swore he'd never let that happen again. He taught me the same lesson. So you've never loved anyone? I loved my sister. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did me. She died when I was 23. After that, I understood what my father meant. Love is a liability in our world. It gives your enemies leverage. The revelation shifted something in how I saw him. Severo Constantine, the cold Mafia boss who destroyed my family without mercy, had once had a sister he loved, had once been capable of that kind of vulnerability. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. He waved off my sympathy. "It was a long time ago. I'm telling you this so you understand. Don't expect affection from me, Hortensia. I can give you protection, comfort, status, but I can't give you love. I don't have it anymore." "I'm not asking for love," I said quietly. I stopped believing in fairy tales the day my father died. This arrangement is exactly what it appears to be. Two people with compatible needs reaching a mutually beneficial agreement. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Then we understand each other." "Perfectly." But as I rode the elevator back down to the waiting Mercedes, I realized I'd learned something valuable tonight. Severo Constantine, for all his power and control, had a weakness. He'd loved his sister, which meant he was capable of attachment, of caring, of the very sentiment he claimed was a liability. And anything he could feel, I could eventually exploit. The driver took me home in silence, and I spent the ride staring out at the city lights, thinking about the conversation. Severo had shown me more of himself tonight than he probably realized. The careful control, the emphasis on emotional distance, the warnings about his behavior, all of it painted a picture of a man trying desperately to maintain walls he'd built over decades. Walls could be scaled, or better yet, walls could be dismantled from within, brick by brick, so slowly the builder never noticed until it was too late. When I reached my apartment, I found a package waiting by my door. Inside was a velvet box containing a diamond engagement ring, so large it looked almost obscene. No note, no explanation. Just the ring and a message as clear as if he'd spoken it aloud. "You belong to me now." I slipped it on my finger, feeling the weight of it like a shackle. 2 more weeks until the wedding. 2 more weeks of freedom before I walked into the cage I'd spent 10 years preparing for. I stood at my window, looking toward Manhattan where Severo's penthouse rose above the city like a fortress. He thought he'd won. Thought he'd claimed the last trophy from his defeated enemy. He had no idea that the real war was just beginning. The wedding took place on a cold December afternoon when the sky threatened snow, but refused to deliver. St. Patrick's Cathedral rose before me like a Gothic monument to everything I was about to surrender. My freedom, my name, my last shred of autonomy. The Vera Wang dress fit perfectly, a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace that must have cost more than I'd earned in the past year. Isabella had outdone herself with the details. Winter roses in deep burgundy, candlelight that turned the cathedral's stone columns to gold, a string quartet playing Vivaldi with heartbreaking precision. I looked like a princess from a fairy tale. I felt like a prisoner walking to execution. Anastasia stood beside me in the cathedral's preparation room, her face carefully neutral as she adjusted my veil. We hadn't spoken freely since she'd arrived in New York 2 days ago. Severo's people were always nearby, always listening. But her eyes conveyed everything her words couldn't. Concern, fear, and the unspoken question of whether I truly knew what I was doing. "You look beautiful," she said softly in Russian, the language of my mother's family. The one piece of my heritage Severo didn't know about because I'd been careful to hide it from his background checks. Like a queen. Queens can be prisoners too, I replied in the same language, my fingers trembling as I touched the diamond necklace Severo had sent that morning. Sapphires and diamonds arranged in a pattern that was both beautiful and unmistakably possessive. The Constantine family crest rendered in precious stones. The cage is just prettier. She took my hands, squeezing tightly. It's not too late. We can leave right now. I have money saved, enough to get us both to... No. I cut her off, switching back to English in case anyone was listening through the door. I'm doing this. I need to do this. What I couldn't tell her, what I could never tell anyone, was that this wasn't capitulation. This was infiltration. You couldn't destroy an empire from the outside. Not when that empire belonged to a man like Severo Constantine. But from the inside, as his wife, with access to his home, his finances, his secrets. That was a different story entirely. The door opened and Isabella appeared, her expression professionally serene. It's time, Miss Belmont. Mr. Constantine is waiting. My last moments as Hortensia Belmont ticked away as I walked down the corridor toward the cathedral's main doors. Through the heavy wood, I could hear the murmur of voices. 150 people gathered to witness this union. Severo's associates and allies, mostly. Men who controlled the city's shadows. Women who'd married into that darkness and learned to smile through it. A few society figures who considered the Constantine name respectable enough to be seen supporting, despite the whispers about what really funded the family's wealth. The doors opened. The quartet shifted to Pachelbel's cannon. And there, at the far end of that impossibly long aisle, stood Severo Constantine in a black tuxedo that transformed him from merely handsome into something almost devastating. His dark hair was swept back, his face composed, his storm-gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch, despite everything I knew about him. As I walked toward him, I saw myself through his eyes, the conquered enemy, finally brought to heel, the last Belmont, surrendering not just herself but her family's name and legacy to the man who destroyed them. A trophy, a prize, a symbol of his absolute victory. Let him think that. Let them all think that. I reached the altar and he took my hand, his grip warm and firm and inescapable. Father O'Brien began the ceremony with words I barely heard. My attention focused on the man beside me. This close, I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the single gray hair at his temple, the small scar on his knuckles that suggested he wasn't always above doing his own violence. He smelled like expensive cologne and danger, and when he turned to face me for the vows, something shifted in his expression, something I couldn't quite read. Do you, Severo Constantine, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady, certain, the voice of a man who'd never doubted a decision in his life. And do you, Hortensia Belmont, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? This was it, the moment of no return. Once I spoke these words, I would be his wife-in-law and in the eyes of society. There would be no easy escape, no simple annulment. I would be bound to him until death or divorce, and men like Severo Constantine didn't believe in divorce. I do. My voice came out stronger than I'd expected, clear and firm. Not the voice of a victim, but of a woman making a choice, even if no one in this cathedral understood what that choice truly meant. Severo slipped the wedding band onto my finger, platinum to match the engagement ring, with diamonds that caught the candlelight, and threw it back in defiant sparks. Then it was my turn, sliding a matching platinum band onto his finger, feeling the warmth of his skin, the strength of the hands that had built an empire and destroyed mine. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. He pulled me close with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, one hand at my waist, the other cupping my face with surprising gentleness. Our first kiss as husband and wife should have been perfunctory, a brief touch of lips for the sake of tradition and witnesses. Instead, Severo kissed me like he was claiming territory, his mouth moving against mine with deliberate possession, stealing my breath and my composure in equal measure. When he finally released me, I saw satisfaction in his eyes. He'd made his point to everyone watching. Hortensia Belmont belonged to him now, completely and irrevocably. The reception was held at the Plaza Hotel, in a ballroom that dripped with old money and new power. I smiled and accepted congratulations from people I didn't know, people who'd probably celebrated when my father fell, people who now looked at me with either pity or contempt, thinly disguised as courtesy. Severo's hand never left my waist, a constant reminder of possession, as he guided me through the crowd like a prize he was showing off. "Your wife is lovely, Severo," said an older man with silver hair and cold eyes. Nikolai Petrov, I remembered from my research. One of Severo's largest investors with connections to Moscow that made even other criminals nervous. "The Belmont blood is excellent. Your children will be handsome." Children. The word sent ice through my veins. We hadn't discussed that aspect of our arrangement, and I deliberately avoided thinking about it. The idea of bringing a child into this world, into this web of violence and control. "We'll see what the future brings," Severo replied smoothly, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly on my waist. A warning, perhaps, not to contradict him in public. I maintained my smile, playing the blushing bride even as my mind raced. Children would complicate everything, would give him another form of control over me, another hostage to ensure my compliance. I needed to address this, but not here, not now, not in front of his allies and associates. The evening progressed in a blur of champagne toasts I didn't drink, food I couldn't taste, and dances with men who held me too close while their wives watched with knowing, pitying eyes. Through it all, Severo remained the perfect groom, attentive without being effusive, possessive without being crude, every gesture calculated to project the image of a powerful man with his prize. Finally, mercifully, it was time for our first dance as husband and wife. The crowd cleared a space on the floor as the band began playing something slow and classical. Severo pulled me into his arms with practiced ease, one hand at the small of my back, the other clasping mine, leading me through a waltz with the confidence of someone who'd been taught by expensive instructors. "You dance well," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Your mother's teaching." Yes. My mother had insisted I learn all the traditional accomplishments of a girl from a good family, never suspecting they'd one day be used to deceive the man who destroyed us. She believed in maintaining certain standards. She would be proud, I think, seeing you here, making the best of a difficult situation. The presumption that my mother would be proud of me marrying her husband's murderer, because that's what Severo was, even if he'd never physically pulled a trigger. He'd killed my father as surely as if he had, made bile rise in my throat. But I swallowed it down, maintained my composure, let him believe whatever comforting fiction allowed him to sleep at night. "Perhaps," I said neutrally, "though I think she'd be more concerned with whether I'll be happy." Something shifted in his expression. "Will you be happy?" The question surprised me with its apparent sincerity. "I don't know," I answered honestly, because sometimes the truth was the best disguise for deeper deceptions. "Ask me in a year." He pulled me closer, close enough that I could feel the solid warmth of him, the strength that had built an empire through force and fear. "I may not be able to give you love, Hortensia, but I can give you everything else: protection, comfort, status, a life free from the struggles you've endured these past years. That should count for something." "It does," I admitted, and it did, even if not in the way he thought. Every resource he gave me, every door his name opened, every secret his trust revealed. All of it would eventually be turned against him. But he didn't need to know that. Not yet. Not until it was far too late. The dance ended to polite applause. Severo kissed my hand with old-world courtesy before releasing me to the next round of obligatory social interactions. I made small talk with Roman Castellano, Severo's closest advisor, a man with intelligent eyes and the careful speech of someone who'd learned that words could be as dangerous as weapons. He asked polite questions about my plans for the penthouse, whether I intended to redecorate, what charities I might become involved with, the expected concerns of a Mafia wife settling into her new role. I gave him the expected answers, all while studying him for weaknesses, for pressure points, for anything that might eventually prove useful. Roman was loyal to Severo, that was clear, but loyalty could be complicated. Loyalty could have limits. By midnight, I was exhausted from the performance, from holding my mask in place for hours, while strangers examined me like a curiosity in a museum. When Severo finally indicated it was time to leave, I felt nothing but relief. The Mercedes that took us to the penthouse was decorated with the traditional just married signs that seemed absurd given the nature of our union. We rode in silence, Severo checking his phone while I stared out at the city lights, trying not to think about what came next. The wedding night, the consummation, the final surrender of the last piece of myself I'd managed to keep separate from this arrangement. "You're afraid," Severo observed, pocketing his phone. "I'm tired," I corrected, which was also true. "That's not what I asked." I turned to face him, this man who was now my husband, who had the legal right to my body and my obedience. "What do you want me to say, Severo?" "Yes, I'm afraid. You're a stranger to me, despite this ring on my finger. We've spent maybe a dozen hours in each other's company. And now we're married, and you're taking me to your home, and I'm expected to—" I broke off, unable to finish the sentence. He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm not going to force myself on you tonight." Hope flickered, quickly suppressed. "You're not. You're exhausted. This has been a long day, and despite what you may think of me, I'm not a monster." He shifted in his seat, and in the dim light of the car, I caught a glimpse of something that might have been humanity in his expression. "When I take you to bed, Hortensia, I want you willing. Compliant, yes, but willing. There's a difference. And if I'm never willing?" His smile was cold, certain. "You will be. Give it time." The arrogance of the statement should have infuriated me. Instead, it gave me hope. Severo Constantine believed he could seduce me, could make me want him, could transform our business arrangement into something that included genuine desire. That belief, that confidence, was a weakness I could exploit. Men who thought they could make women fall for them were often blind to manipulation disguised as affection. The penthouse was exactly as I remembered from my dinner visit. Beautiful, cold, more fortress than home. But now there were differences. My suitcases in the master bedroom, my toiletries in the bathroom. My presence stamped onto a space that had been exclusively his. "You'll sleep here," Severo said, gesturing to the master suite. "I have a room down the hall I use when I work late. I'll stay there tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss the household arrangements, expectations, all of it. But tonight—" He paused, and something almost gentle crossed his features. "Tonight, you should rest." It was the kindness, unexpected and probably calculated, that nearly broke me. I nodded mutely, not trusting my voice, and watched him leave, closing the door softly behind him. Alone in Severo Constantine's bedroom, wearing a wedding dress that cost more than my yearly salary, a ring on my finger that marked me as his property, I finally let the mask slip, sank onto the enormous bed, and let myself feel the weight of what I'd done, the gamble I'd taken, the decade-long game I'd just entered the next phase of. Then I stood, stripped off the beautiful dress, and hung it carefully in the closet. Washed my face, removing the carefully applied makeup. Pulled on the simple nightgown I'd packed, rejecting the elaborate silk negligee Isabella had insisted belonged in my trousseau. Tomorrow, I would begin the real work, learning the patterns of this household, gaining the trust of the staff, mapping the security systems, finding where Severo kept his secrets. Tomorrow, I would start building the foundation of his destruction. But tonight, I was simply Hortensia Constantine, newly married to the man who'd killed her father and brother. And that truth, heavy as a stone, followed me into uneasy sleep. The first 3 months of marriage established a routine that was both comfortable and suffocating. Severo left early for his office downtown, returning late with the smell of cigars and bourbon clinging to his expensive suits. I spent my days learning the rhythms of the penthouse, befriending the housekeeper Maria, who'd worked for Severo for 15 years, and knew things she'd never tell me directly but revealed in small, careful comments. We maintained separate bedrooms by unspoken agreement, though Severo would sometimes appear in my doorway late at night, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He never crossed the threshold without invitation, true to his word about wanting me willing. But the looks he gave me suggested his patience had limits. In public, we played the perfect couple. Charity galas where I wore couture and smiled on his arm. Business dinners where I made small talk with the wives while the men discussed things we weren't meant to hear. Society events where the Constantine name opened doors that had been closed to the Belmonts for a decade. And slowly, carefully, I began to work. It started with the household finances. Severo had mentioned, almost dismissively, that his previous accountant had retired and he needed someone to review the domestic expenses. I'd offered to help, presenting it as a way to be useful, to earn my place in his home beyond simply being decorative. "You studied business," he'd said, surprised when I mentioned it over breakfast one morning. "International business, yes. I thought it might be useful someday." I kept my voice light, casual. "I'm good with numbers, and I have time on my hands, unless you'd prefer I spend my days shopping and lunching like the other wives." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "Show me what you can do with last month's expenses. If you're any good, we'll discuss expanding your responsibilities." The household finances gave me access to payment records, vendor contracts, and, most importantly, patterns. I discovered that Severo paid his housekeeper significantly above market rate, that he had a standing order with a particular florist to send roses to the same address every week, that he donated quietly to several charities that helped the children of incarcerated parents. The last detail surprised me. Severo Constantine, who'd built his empire on fear and violence, apparently had a soft spot for children paying for the sins of their fathers. I filed the information away, another piece of the puzzle I was slowly assembling. "You have a good eye for inefficiencies," he said after reviewing my first report. We were in his study, the room he retreated to for the business he didn't discuss with me. "There are redundancies here I'd never noticed. You've saved us nearly $15,000 a month." "I'm glad I can be useful," I replied, meaning it more than he knew. Because with access to the household accounts came access to the software system, to the network, to the digital architecture of his life. And where there was digital architecture, there were always vulnerabilities. By the end of my 3rd month as Mrs. Constantine, I had complete access to the household finances and had begun sitting in on meetings with his estate lawyer about property holdings. Severo seemed pleased with my interest, interpreting it as a wife taking pride in her husband's achievements, rather than what it truly was: reconnaissance. "You're not what I expected," he told me one evening. We were having dinner together, a rare occurrence given his schedule. "Most women in your position would be content to spend money and look beautiful. You actually want to understand how things work." "Is that a problem?" I asked carefully. "No." He refilled his wine glass, studying me over the rim. "It's refreshing. My mother was like that. She ran my father's legitimate businesses while he handled the other side. She had a head for numbers and strategy that rivaled any of his advisors. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother beyond that brief reference to her death. You must miss her. Every day. The admission seemed to surprise him. She died when I was 19. Cancer. My father fell apart afterward, made decisions based on grief instead of strategy. That's when I learned the most important lesson of my life. Which was, that sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. That love makes you weak, makes you vulnerable. He met my gaze directly. It's why this arrangement between us is actually ideal. No messy emotions to cloud judgment, just mutual benefit. I should have agreed. Should have reinforced his belief that I wanted nothing from him beyond security and comfort. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Do you ever get lonely?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the mask slipped and I saw something raw beneath it, a flash of isolation, of the cost of building walls so high that no one could scale them. Then it was gone. "No," he said flatly. "Loneliness is for people who need others to feel complete. I don't have that weakness." Liar, I thought. But I simply nodded and changed the subject. That night, for the first time, Severo knocked on my bedroom door after midnight. I was still awake, reading financial reports on my laptop, trying to trace the flow of money through his various businesses, to find the illegal channels I knew had to exist. "Come in," I called, quickly closing the laptop. He entered wearing silk pajama pants and nothing else, his chest bare and more muscular than I'd expected for a man who spent most of his time behind a desk. There was a scar across his ribs, old, faded, but clearly from something violent. "Couldn't sleep," he said, moving to stand by my window. "Thought I'd check if you were awake." "I am now." I pulled my robe tighter, suddenly aware of how little the silk nightgown beneath it concealed. "Is something wrong?" "No. Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd rarely seen from him. "I had dinner with Roman tonight. He mentioned that you've been asking questions about the family's history, about my father." My heart rate picked up, but I kept my expression neutral. "Maria mentioned some things. I was curious about the man who built all this." I gestured vaguely at our surroundings. "Was that inappropriate?" "It's not inappropriate. It's just..." He trailed off, staring out at the city lights. "My father was a complicated man, brilliant, ruthless, and ultimately destroyed by his own weakness. I don't particularly enjoy discussing him." "Then we won't," I said simply. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." He turned to face me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "You're very good at this, you know, playing the supportive wife. Sometimes I almost forget why you're really here." The words sent ice through my veins. "I'm here because we made an arrangement, one that benefits us both." "Is that all?" He moved closer, and I found myself backing up until I hit the wall beside my window. He braced one hand against the wall beside my head, his body close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the bourbon on his breath. "Because sometimes, Hortensia, I catch you looking at me with something that doesn't look like calculation, something that looks almost like..." "Like what?" My voice came out breathier than I intended. "Like you're trying to figure me out, like you actually care about the answer." His free hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with surprising gentleness. Which would be a mistake, for both of us. I should have pushed him away, should have reminded him of the boundaries we'd established, the emotional distance we'd both agreed was necessary. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my body betraying my carefully maintained control. "Maybe it would be," I whispered. "Or maybe it would be the most honest thing either of us has done in months." He kissed me then, not with the possessive claiming of our wedding day, but with something rawer, more desperate. Like a man reaching for something he'd convinced himself he didn't need, until suddenly it was in front of him, and he couldn't remember why he'd been denying himself. I kissed him back, and it was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake even as I did it, even as my hands found his bare shoulders, even as I pressed closer to him, because this wasn't part of the plan. The plan didn't include actually wanting him, actually responding to his touch with genuine desire, rather than calculated manipulation. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes searched mine with an intensity that made me feel exposed in ways that had nothing to do with my state of undress. "This changes things," he said quietly. "It doesn't have to." Liar. But there was no anger in his voice, just resignation. "Go to sleep, Hortensia. We'll pretend this didn't happen." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and I sank onto my bed with shaking hands. What had I just done? I'd spent 3 months carefully building trust, carefully maintaining emotional distance, carefully positioning myself as useful, but unthreatening. And I'd nearly ruined it all because some traitorous part of me responded to Severo Constantine's touch. I couldn't afford complications. Couldn't afford to blur the lines between revenge and something that looked dangerously like genuine connection. He was the enemy. The man who'd destroyed my family. The target I'd spent a decade preparing to take down. The fact that he was also complicated, occasionally vulnerable, and apparently capable of the very sentiment he claimed to despise. None of that mattered. It couldn't matter. I pulled out my laptop again, forcing myself to focus on the financial records I'd been studying, following the money through shell corporations and offshore accounts, looking for the proof I'd need when the time came to destroy him. But my mind kept wandering back to the kiss, to the way his hand had trembled slightly when he'd touched my face, to the loneliness I'd seen in his eyes when he'd talked about his mother. "Stop," I commanded myself. "He's not a person. He's a target. Remember what he did to your family. Remember why you're here." But the problem was, after 3 months of living with him, of seeing him interact with his staff with unexpected courtesy, of watching him make quiet donations to help children who reminded him of something he'd lost, of catching glimpses of the man beneath the monster. The problem was that I was starting to see him as a person. A complicated, damaged person, yes, but a person nonetheless. And that made everything infinitely more dangerous. The next morning, we didn't mention the kiss. Severo was already gone when I woke, and he didn't return until late that night. The pattern continued for the next week. Careful avoidance disguised as busy schedules, both of us retreating to the safety of our separate spheres. But something had shifted. I caught him watching me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite read. And I found myself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe, whether the meeting he'd mentioned with the Bratva representatives would turn violent. Caring about his safety. God help me, I was starting to care. It was Anastasia who finally confronted me about it. She'd come to visit for the weekend, one of the rare times Severo had agreed to let me have visitors. We were having tea in the penthouse's sitting room, speaking in Russian while Severo was locked in his study on business calls. "You're falling for him," she said bluntly. "Deny it all you want, but I can see it. The way you light up when he enters a room, the way you worry when he's late. Orty, this wasn't the plan." "I know." I stared into my teacup, unable to meet her eyes. "I know it wasn't. But he's not what I expected, Stasia. He's still the enemy, still the man who destroyed our family. But he's also more complicated than I thought, more human." "More human?" She set down her cup with a sharp click. "He killed your father. He killed Marco. Have you forgotten that in the comfort of this gilded cage?" "I forget nothing," I snapped, the words harsh in Russian. Not my father's death. Not my brother's. Not the decade I spent in exile. I remember all of it, every day. But I also see who Severo is beyond those actions. And it's not as simple as I wanted it to be. Then maybe you should abort this mission before you lose yourself completely. Before you forget which side you're on. But I couldn't. Because I'd discovered something in my digging through his finances. Something that changed everything. Evidence of payments to 3 different offshore accounts. Payments that corresponded exactly with the timing of the attacks on my father's business. Payments that suggested Severo hadn't acted alone in destroying the Belmont Empire. Someone had helped him. Someone had fed him information from inside my father's organization. And I needed to find out who. Which meant I needed to stay close to Severo, needed his trust, needed access to the parts of his operation he still kept hidden from me, even if it meant risking my heart in the process. The discovery came on a Tuesday afternoon, while Severo was meeting with his lawyers downtown. I'd been working through his property holdings, cross-referencing purchase dates with my father's business records that I'd memorized before they were all seized. That's when I found it. A warehouse in Red Hook that had belonged to the Belmonts, purchased by a shell corporation 3 days before my father's death. 3 days before. Not after, when Severo had swooped in to claim the spoils of his victory. Before. My hands trembled as I traced the ownership through layers of corporate structures until I found the name I'd been simultaneously hoping for and dreading. Belmont Holdings, LLC. The company that had sold the warehouse to Severo's shell corporation had been registered to Marco Belmont, my brother. Marco had sold our family's property to Severo before the war even ended, had betrayed our father while pretending loyalty. I sat frozen at Severo's desk, the revelation crashing over me in waves. Everything I'd believed about my family, about that night, about who was responsible for our fall, all of it had been built on a foundation of lies. You found it. Severo's voice from the doorway made me jump. I spun to find him leaning against the frame, still in his overcoat, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The meeting ended early, he continued, moving into the study. I came home to find my wife going through my private files. Should I be concerned? Marco, I whispered, my voice breaking on my brother's name. He was working with you. He betrayed our father. Severo's face revealed nothing. Yes. The simple confirmation hit me like a physical blow. How long? 2 years before your father's death. He poured himself a bourbon, his movements unhurried. Marco approached me, said he was tired of living in your father's shadow, tired of waiting for power that might never come. He offered me information in exchange for a place in my organization after the Belmonts fell. I thought I might be sick. And you accepted. Of course I accepted. Your brother handed me everything I needed to destroy your father. Shipping routes, supplier contacts, which judges and cops were on his payroll, where he kept his most damaging records. Severo took a drink, watching me over the rim of his glass. Marco was supposed to survive the takedown, was supposed to come work for me. But your father discovered his betrayal the night before I moved against him. The night my brother died. Not in crossfire, as I'd always believed, but as a traitor, caught and killed by our own father's men before Severo could reach him. You've known all along, I said, my voice hollow. Known that I spent 10 years blaming you for Marco's death when it was our father who killed him. I suspected you didn't know the full truth. Marco said he'd kept you separate from the business, that you were too young, too innocent. Something flickered in Severo's eyes. That's why I agreed to meet with you when your lawyer called. I was curious if you knew what your brother had done, if this marriage proposal was some elaborate trap. But you clearly didn't. Don't. Past tense. Because now I did know. Now everything I'd built my revenge on had shifted beneath my feet like sand. Why tell me now? I asked. Why not just let me keep believing the lie? He set down his glass and moved toward me, his steps deliberate. Because you've been digging through my files for 3 months, Hortensia. Because you're too smart not to find the truth eventually. And because... He paused, something vulnerable crossing his features. Because I'm tired of having a wife who looks at me like I'm the monster who destroyed her family when the truth is so much more complicated. You still destroyed us, I said, but the words lacked conviction. Marco's betrayal doesn't absolve you of... I know. He was close now, close enough to touch. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm asking for honesty. You've been playing a game since the moment you proposed this marriage. Building trust, gaining access, looking for weaknesses. You think I didn't notice? You think I don't know exactly what you've been doing? Fear spiked through me, sharp and cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Liar. But there was no anger in his voice, just resignation. You're good, Hortensia. Better than I expected. The way you befriended Maria, got her to talk about my routines. The financial access you negotiated so carefully. The questions about my father's business, about the family history. All of it perfectly calculated to look like a dutiful wife, taking interest in her husband's world, when really you were mapping my empire for destruction. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the pounding of my heart against my ribs. If you knew, why let me continue? Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. He reached out, fingers catching my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. Wanted to see if the last Belmont had the steel her father lacked. And you do, Hortensia. You have more strength, more intelligence, more strategic thinking than your father ever possessed. You would have made a formidable enemy. Would have. Past tense again. I'm not your enemy anymore? I asked, hating how my voice shook. I don't know what you are. His thumb traced my lower lip, the touch sending unwanted heat through me. 3 months ago, I thought I was marrying a defeated woman looking for security. But the woman standing in front of me isn't defeated. She's calculating. Dangerous. And despite every logical reason I shouldn't, I find myself wanting her more every day. This isn't real, I whispered, even as I leaned into his touch. Whatever you think you feel, it's not. Don't tell me what I feel. His other hand slid into my hair, tilting my head back. I've spent 20 years convincing myself I was incapable of sentiment, of the weakness that destroyed my father. And then you walked into my life, with your quiet strength and your hidden vengeance. And suddenly I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting to know what you're thinking, whether you slept well, if you're safe when I'm not here to protect you. Protect me? I laughed, the sound bitter. You're the danger, Severo. You're what I need protecting from. Am I? He leaned closer, his lips brushing my ear. Because from where I'm standing, the greatest danger is what's happening between us. This thing neither of us planned for, neither of us wanted, but can't seem to stop. He was right. God help me. He was right. Somewhere in the past 3 months, beneath the careful manipulation and strategic positioning, something genuine had grown. I'd started to care about him, about this complicated, damaged man who ran an empire built on fear, but donated anonymously to children's charities, who claimed to be incapable of love, but mourned his mother decades after her death, who'd known I was planning his destruction, but let me continue anyway, just to see what I would do. What happens now? I asked, my hands coming up to rest against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my palms, steady and strong. You know what I've been planning. You could destroy me, kill me, make me disappear like Katrina from the story you told. I could, he agreed. But I won't. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation and the revenge plot, you're the most real thing in my life. The only person who looks at me and sees both the monster and the man. And He stopped, the words seeming to catch in his throat. You what? I love you. The admission came out rough, almost angry, as if the words themselves were a betrayal of everything he'd built his life around. I love you, and I have no fucking idea what to do about it. The confession should have been my victory, should have been the moment I revealed my own manipulation, used his feelings against him, struck the final blow. Instead, I found myself rising on my toes, closing the distance between us, kissing him with a desperation that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the truth I'd been hiding even from myself. I loved him too. Somehow, impossibly, I'd fallen in love with the man I'd spent 10 years preparing to destroy. We made love for the first time that afternoon, not in the master bedroom, but right there in his study, with financial records scattered around us and the city sprawling below the windows. It was fierce and tender and complicated, like everything between us. Like us. Afterward, lying tangled together on the leather couch, his hand tracing idle patterns on my bare shoulder, I made a decision. I found something else, I said quietly. In your files. Evidence of 3 offshore accounts that received payments during the time you were moving against my father. Accounts I couldn't trace, that don't connect to any of your known holdings. His hand stilled. How did you find those? I'm very good at what I do. I propped myself up on one elbow, meeting his gaze. The question is, whose accounts are they? Because if Marco was your only inside source, there's no reason for those payments. Severo was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, you're right. Marco wasn't my only source. There was someone else. Someone closer to your father than Marco ever was. Who? Your father's lawyer, Anthony Delacroix, Adrian's father. The revelation hit me like ice water. Adrian, Severo's current lawyer, was the son of the man who'd betrayed my father. Does Adrian know? No. Anthony died 5 years ago, took the secret to his grave. I've kept Adrian on because he's brilliant, and because he has no idea what his father did. Severo sat up, reaching for his discarded shirt. Those payments you found were blackmail. Anthony had been stealing from your father for years, skimming from accounts he managed. When I discovered it, I gave him a choice. Help me destroy the Belmont Empire, or I'd expose his theft to your father. He chose to help me. And now? I asked, pulling on my own clothes, my mind already racing through implications. What about now? Now? He turned to face me, fully dressed again, the vulnerability of moments ago carefully locked away. Now you have a choice to make, Hortensia. You have evidence of my crimes, knowledge of how I destroyed your family, and enough access to my operation to do real damage if you wanted. You could go to the authorities, testify against me, watch me burn the way I watched your father burn. Or you could stay. Not as my prisoner or my trophy or the defeated enemy making the best of a bad situation. He moved closer, taking my hands in his. Stay as my partner, my equal. Help me rebuild this empire into something better than what my father left me, something that doesn't require quite so much blood. I should have laughed at the absurdity of it. The man who destroyed my family asking me to help him legitimize his criminal empire. But I saw the sincerity in his eyes, felt the truth of his earlier confession. He loved me, and I loved him. And together, we were either going to heal or destroy each other. I want access to everything, I said finally. Full transparency about your operations. Partnership and decision-making. Not just domestic, but business too. And we start moving the empire toward legitimate holdings. Real estate, shipping, import-export, all clean. Within 5 years, I want the Constantine name to be respectable. That's a tall order. You asked what it would take for me to stay. That's what it takes. I pulled my hands from his, crossing my arms. I won't be married to a crime lord, Severo, but I could be married to a businessman who's working to clean up his family's legacy. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing it. The loss of power that came with legitimacy, the complicated process of washing blood money clean, the risks of turning on former allies and partners. All right, he said finally. We'll do it your way. 5 years to go legitimate. But I have one condition. What? You stop hiding from me. No more separate bedrooms. No more emotional distance. No more pretending this is just a business arrangement. He moved closer, his hands settling at my waist. If we're going to be partners, we're going to be partners in every sense. Which means you trust me with the truth, even when it's ugly. Even when it scares you. The truth, I repeated slowly. Like the fact that I've been funneling money from your accounts into rebuilding the Belmont holdings? That I've been using my access to your network to reconnect with my family's old allies? That I've spent the past 3 months preparing to either destroy you or take control of your empire, depending on which opportunity presented itself first? To his credit, Severo didn't even flinch. How much have you taken? 47 million, spread across various accounts and investments. I've been very careful. I know. I've been watching you do it. At my expression of shock, he smiled grimly. I told you, Hortensia. I've known what you were doing from the beginning. I just wanted to see how good you were at it. And you're exceptional. Better than most of the men I employ. You let me steal $50 million just to test me? I let my wife reclaim what was stolen from her family, he corrected. The money your father lost when I destroyed his empire came from somewhere. Seemed only fair you should get some of it back, especially since you were clever enough to take it without getting caught. He paused. Though I'd appreciate if future withdrawals came with a bit more communication. Partnership, remember? I stared at him. This man I'd married intending to destroy, who'd apparently been aware of my every move and allowed it anyway. Who'd just agreed to dismantle his criminal empire because I asked. Who looked at me with eyes that held both love and respect. Something I'd never expected to find in this arrangement. What are we doing? I asked softly. This is insane. We're insane. Probably, he agreed. But we're also perfectly matched. You're the only woman I've ever met who could actually challenge me. Actually make me want to be better than what I was raised to be. And I hope, I'm the only man who sees you not as a victim to be pitied or a trophy to be claimed, but as an equal worth fighting beside. He was right. Somewhere in these 3 months of manipulation and strategy and carefully constructed lies, we'd found something neither of us had been looking for. Genuine partnership. Not built on romance or passion, though we had that too. But built on mutual respect, on matched intelligence, on the recognition that we were stronger together than apart. 5 years, I said, making my decision. We go legitimate in 5 years. We build something that both our families could be proud of, something that doesn't require quite so much blood and fear. And we do it together, as equals. As equals, he agreed, pulling me close. And as husband and wife. Real marriage this time, not just an arrangement. I should have felt like I was betraying my father's memory. Should have felt guilt for falling in love with the man who destroyed my family. But my father had been killed by his own man for Marco's betrayal. And Marco had been the real architect of our fall. Severo had simply been the weapon my brother had pointed at our family. And now, that weapon had become my partner, my equal, my husband in truth, not just on paper. I love you, I said, the words coming easier than I'd expected. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you, Severo Constantine. His smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes and softening the hard edges I'd grown accustomed to. I love you too, Hortensia Constantine. My wife, my partner, my equal. We sealed the bargain with a kiss that held promise instead of possession. And as the sun set over New York City, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I realized that revenge had led me here, but love would keep me. My father's empire was gone. Marco's betrayal had destroyed it from within. But from those ashes, I was building something new. Not a restoration of what was lost, but a transformation of what could be. The Belmont name would rise again, not through violence or revenge, but through the partnership I'd forged with the man who'd been my enemy. Together, we would remake the Constantine Empire into something worthy of both our legacies. And in 5 years, when the transformation was complete, when the blood had been washed clean and the empire stood on legitimate foundations, I would look back on this moment, this impossible, unlikely, beautiful moment, and know that I'd chosen correctly. Not revenge, not destruction, but rebirth and love. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything I'd planned. Love. The game wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now we were playing on the same side. And that changed everything.